The stampede of hooves and gunfire sent Gwendolyn Jenkins scrambling behind the festival tents, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs as the carefully planned town celebration descended into chaos. She had been mere hours away from marrying Gerald Dawson, the banker's son whose cold eyes and calculating manner had always made her skin crawl, a union arranged by her father to settle debts she hadn't even known existed until 2 weeks ago. Dust swirled around her as she crouched behind stacked whiskey barrels. The elaborate wedding dress her stepmother had insisted upon now smeared with dirt and torn at the hem. Tears stung her eyes as shouts rang through Cottonwood Springs, the small frontier town that had been her home for all 22 years of her life. The Apache raid was unexpected. The tribe had kept peaceful relations with the town for nearly 3 years, but the gunfire and confusion provided the escape she'd been praying for. "I won't marry him," she whispered to herself, clutching the small beaded reticule containing the only valuables she owned, her mother's locket and the $10 she'd saved from selling eggs. Not today, not ever. Gwendolyn gathered the voluminous skirts of her wedding dress, ducking between tents and dodging townspeople as they ran for safety. The festival grounds that had been decorated with ribbons and flowers for both the town's founding day celebration and her wedding now lay in disarray. She moved toward the creek at the edge of town, where the cottonwood trees would provide cover while she decided what to do next. The sound of a man clearing his throat froze her mid-step. "Madam, I don't believe hiding in those trees is the safest plan you've got." She whirled around to find herself facing a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore trail-worn clothing, a dusty brown hat, and had a 6-shooter holstered at his hip. Despite the chaos, he seemed oddly calm, his posture relaxed as he leaned against his chestnut mare. "I'm not hiding," Gwendolyn said, lifting her chin defiantly. "And who might you be to decide what's safe for me?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Name's Kieran Xavier. Just rode into town hoping for a peaceful meal and maybe a hand of cards." He tipped his hat. "Instead, I find a bride running away from what appears to be her own wedding day." Heat rushed to Gwendolyn's cheeks. "I'm not running away. That right?" Kieran raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Most brides I've encountered don't spend their wedding days crouched behind whiskey barrels while Apache warriors ride through town." "I wasn't," Gwendolyn began, but the sound of shouting men approaching made her words die in her throat. She recognized Gerald's nasal voice among them, ordering the sheriff to search the festival grounds. Kieran noticed her panic. "Someone looking for you, miss." "Jenkins, Gwendolyn Jenkins," she replied, casting a fearful glance over her shoulder. "And yes, my fiancé." "But please, I can't go back. You don't need to understand everything to know when someone's in trouble," Kieran interrupted, extending his hand. "Question is, do you want my help?" Gwendolyn hesitated only a moment before nodding, surprising herself with the immediate trust she felt toward this stranger. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was something in those steady gray eyes that promised safety. "Good choice," he said, swinging up onto his horse and reaching down to pull her up behind him. "Hold tight now." She wrapped her arms around his waist as the horse broke into a gallop, heading away from town and into the vast expanse of territory beyond. The wind whipped her veil free, sending it fluttering like a ghost behind them as they rode toward the distant mountains. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the thundering hoofbeats. "Somewhere safe," Kieran called back. "Just trust me a little longer, Miss Jenkins." As they rode, the sounds of chaos from Cottonwood Springs faded behind them. Gwendolyn's wedding dress billowed around her like a cloud, and she found herself laughing despite the insanity of it all. She was fleeing her wedding with a man she'd met only minutes ago, riding into the wilderness of the Arizona Territory, and yet she felt more alive than she had in years. The year was 1878, and for the first time since her mother's death 7 years prior, Gwendolyn Jenkins was making her own choices. They rode for nearly 2 hours, the landscape changing from scrubland to rocky foothills. Finally, Kieran slowed his horse as they approached a small cabin nestled among a stand of juniper trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a corral stood empty to one side. "My friend's place," Kieran explained, dismounting and helping Gwendolyn down. Her legs wobbled beneath her after the long ride. "He's a trapper gone north for the season. We can rest here tonight before deciding what comes next." "Next?" Gwendolyn asked, suddenly aware of the implications of her impulsive flight. "I hadn't thought much beyond escape." Kieran smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Most escapes start that way. Come on inside before that dress attracts every curious creature within 10 miles. The cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a single bed in the corner. Kieran busied himself stoking the fire while Gwendolyn stood awkwardly in the center of the room, her elaborate dress looking absurdly out of place among the rustic furnishings. "There are some clothes in that trunk," Kieran said, nodding toward a wooden chest. "My friend's sister stays here sometimes. They might fit you better then." "That." Gwendolyn nodded gratefully, moving toward the trunk as Kieran discreetly stepped outside to tend to his horse. Inside, she found several simple dresses and selected one of faded blue cotton. She struggled with the buttons of her wedding gown, eventually managing to free herself from the constricting garment. As she changed, Gwendolyn caught her reflection in a small mirror hanging on the wall. Her carefully arranged hair had come loose, dark curls tumbling around her shoulders. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes shone with an excitement she hadn't seen in them for years. Whatever came next, she wouldn't regret this day. When Kieran returned, he carried saddlebags and a bundle of firewood. He paused when he saw her, and something flickered in his expression that made Gwendolyn's heart quicken. "Better?" she asked, smoothing the simple dress. "Much," he replied, setting down his burden. "Though you were a sight in that wedding dress, too, lucky man, that fiancé of yours." "Former fiancé," Gwendolyn corrected firmly. "And not lucky at all. Gerald Dawson is a cruel man who sees women as property. The only reason he wanted to marry me was to acquire my father's land." Kieran's expression darkened. "And your father agreed to this arrangement, my father." Gwendolyn sighed, sinking into one of the chairs. "He's not been himself since Mother died. He remarried a woman who cares only for status and money, and when his business ventures failed, he turned to drink. The marriage was to settle his gambling debts to Gerald's father." "So you were the payment," Kieran said quietly, anger evident in his tone. "I was," Gwendolyn confirmed. "Until today." Kieran set about preparing a simple meal from his provisions, and Gwendolyn watched him move with easy efficiency around the small space. There was something comforting in his presence, a steadiness she hadn't experienced in a long time. "What about you?" she asked as he handed her a plate of beans and jerky. "What brings a man like you to Cottonwood Springs on festival day?" Kieran sat across from her, his expression guarded. "Just passing through. I do odd jobs mostly, cattle driving, scouting, whatever pays enough to keep moving." "Running from something?" Gwendolyn asked, then blushed at her boldness. A smile touched his lips. "Aren't we all in some way?" He took a bite of his food. "But no, not in the way you mean. I fought for the Union in the war, came west afterward looking for something I couldn't find back east." "And did you find it?" "Not yet," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "But I keep looking." They ate in comfortable silence as dusk settled outside. The small cabin grew cozy with firelight, and Gwendolyn found herself studying Kieran's face, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. He wasn't conventionally handsome like some of the men back in town, but there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that drew her in. "You should take the bed," Kieran said as they finished eating. "I'll be fine by the fire." Gwendolyn hesitated. "I've already imposed on you enough." "You haven't imposed at all," he replied. "Truth be told, this is the most interesting day I've had in months." She laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse? As she settled onto the bed later, Gwendolyn watched Kieran spreading his bedroll near the hearth. The events of the day washed over her: the wedding she'd fled, the stranger who'd helped her, the uncertain future ahead. Fear and excitement mingled in her chest as she closed her eyes, wondering what morning would bring. Dawn came with birdsong and the scent of coffee. Gwendolyn opened her eyes to find Kieran already awake, cooking something over the fire. He glanced up as she stirred, offering a smile that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected," she admitted, sitting up and smoothing her hair. "Good, we should talk about what happens now." His tone was gentle but serious. "The Apache raid will have been dealt with by now, which means your father and former fiancé will be looking for you." Reality crashed over Gwendolyn like cold water. "Yes, I suppose they will. Do you have anywhere to go? Family in another town, perhaps?" She shook her head. "No one who wouldn't send me straight back to my father." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I could find work, I suppose. I can cook 10 children." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "There's a town about 2 days' ride from here, Silver Creek. It's growing fast with the mining operations. They'd likely have work for a capable woman." "You'd take me there?" Gwendolyn asked, hope rising within her. "I would," Kieran confirmed, handing her a plate of fried cornmeal. "But you should know your former fiancé might not give up easily. Men like that rarely do." "I know," she said quietly. "But I can't go back. I won't." "Then we head for Silver Creek," Kieran said, his decision made. "We'll leave after breakfast." They set out as the morning mist still clung to the hills, Gwendolyn once again riding behind Kieran, though now dressed in more practical clothing. She'd rolled her wedding dress into a bundle, unable to leave behind the expensive fabric that could be sold if necessary. The day passed in companionable conversation as they rode through the rugged landscape. Kieran pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his travels, while Gwendolyn spoke of growing up in Cottonwood Springs, of her mother's garden and the books she loved to read. "You're educated, then?" Kieran asked as they stopped to rest the horse and eat a simple lunch. "My mother insisted on it," Gwendolyn explained. "She taught school before she married my father. She always said a woman needed her mind more than a pretty face." "Wise woman," Kieran commented. "My mother said something similar, though her words were more along the lines of a man who can't read will always work for the man who can." "And did you listen?" Kieran smiled. "I did. Read everything I could get my hands on growing up. Still do when I can find books on the trail." Gwendolyn felt a surge of connection at this shared love of learning. It was unexpected to find such a kindred spirit in this wandering cowboy. As they continued their journey, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. By mid-afternoon, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour that forced them to seek shelter in a shallow cave. Huddled together as thunder crashed outside, Gwendolyn found herself acutely aware of Kieran's proximity, the warmth of his body beside hers, the scent of leather and pine that clung to him. When he draped his coat around her shoulders, his fingers brushed against her neck, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up to find his eyes on her, dark and unreadable in the dim light. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice low. For a moment she thought he might say more, might lean closer. But instead he moved away to check on his horse, leaving Gwendolyn with a strange sense of disappointment. The storm passed by nightfall, but they decided to make camp rather than continue in the dark. Kieran built a small fire and they sat side by side, watching the flames dance as stars appeared in the clearing sky. "Can I ask you something?" Gwendolyn said after a long silence. "Of course. Why did you help me?" "Back in Cottonwood Springs, you could have just ridden on, especially with the Apache raid. Why stop for a stranger?" Kieran was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "I saw your face," he said finally. "The look in your eyes, fear, yes, but determination too. It reminded me of someone." "Who?" "My sister," he answered, his voice softening. "Elizabeth. She was married off to a man twice her age when she was just 18, a wealthy rancher who treated her like property. His jaw tightened. I was away fighting in the war. By the time I returned, it was too late to stop it. What happened to her? Gwendolyn asked gently. She died in childbirth 2 years later, Kieran said, pain evident in his voice. The baby too. Her husband remarried within 6 months. I'm so sorry, Gwendolyn whispered, instinctively reaching for his hand. He allowed the touch, his rough fingers curling around hers. So when I saw you hiding, looking like you wanted to be anywhere but at your own wedding. He shrugged. I couldn't ride away, not again. Understanding dawned on Gwendolyn. You're trying to save me because you couldn't save her. Kieran met her gaze, something vulnerable in his expression. Maybe, or maybe I just recognized someone who deserves better than what life handed her. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken emotions. Gwendolyn was suddenly very aware of how close they sat, their hands still joined. Kieran, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp, and Kieran was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn. Gwendolyn froze, heart hammering. Who's there? Kieran called, positioning himself between Gwendolyn and the sound. Silence, then another snap of branches. A deer emerged from the trees, regarding them with liquid eyes before bounding away. Kieran exhaled slowly, holstering his weapon. Just wildlife, he said, but his posture remained tense. Still, we should be careful. Get some sleep, Gwendolyn. I'll keep watch for a while. She nodded, wrapping herself in the blanket he offered, but sleep was long in coming. Her thoughts kept returning to their conversation, to the touch of his hand, to the way he said her name with a softness that made her pulse quicken. By morning, the land was washed clean by the rain, wildflowers dotting the hills in bursts of color. They made good time, stopping briefly at a stream to refill their canteens. As Kieran knelt by the water, Gwendolyn noticed a hawk circling overhead, its wings spread wide against the blue sky. It's beautiful here, she said, breathing deeply. So different from town life. Kieran glanced up, following her gaze to the hawk. It is, this country has a way of getting into your blood. Is that why you keep moving, to see more of it? He stood, securing the canteen to his saddle. Partly. Though sometimes I wonder if I'm just running in circles, looking for something I wouldn't recognize if I found it. What about family? Don't you ever want to settle down? A shadow passed over his features. Once, maybe now, he shrugged. Hard to build a home when you're not sure where you belong. Gwendolyn felt a pang of sympathy. For all his strength and capability, there was a loneliness to Kieran Xavier that called to something within her. They mounted up and continued their journey, crossing rolling hills and dry creek beds. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Kieran pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance, nestled in a valley. Silver Creek, he said. We'll reach it by nightfall. Gwendolyn felt a conflicting rush of emotions, relief at reaching their destination, but also a strange reluctance. Once they arrived, her time with Kieran would likely end. The thought left a hollow feeling in her chest. What will you do after you've delivered me safely? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. Kieran was quiet for a moment. Move on, I suppose. There's talk of cattle work up north. I see, she said, unable to hide her disappointment entirely. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in thought. As they drew closer to Silver Creek, the sound of galloping hooves behind them made them both turn. 3 riders approached rapidly from the direction they had come. Trouble, Kieran muttered, urging his horse off the main trail and into a stand of trees. Could be nothing, but let's not take chances. They watched from cover as the riders drew closer. Gwendolyn's blood ran cold as she recognized the lead rider, Gerald Dawson, his face set in grim lines of determination. It's him, she whispered, gripping Kieran's arm. How did he find us? Small towns have long memories, Kieran said grimly. Someone must have seen which way we headed and sold the information. He looked at her, his expression serious. We can run or we can face this. Your choice, Gwendolyn. She swallowed hard, fear and anger battling within her. I'm tired of running from him from my father's mistakes. But what can we do? There are 3 of them. Kieran's mouth curved in a confident smile that sent a thrill through her. I've faced worse odds, but we need a plan. They quickly devised a strategy. Kieran would confront the men directly while Gwendolyn circled back, using the cover of trees to approach from behind. If things went badly, she was to ride for Silver Creek as fast as possible. Be careful, she whispered as they prepared to separate. On impulse, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek. For luck, something flashed in his eyes, surprise, then something warmer. I don't need luck with you on my side, he replied, squeezing her hand before they parted. Gwendolyn moved through the trees, her heart pounding as she watched Kieran ride boldly onto the trail, intercepting Gerald and his men. Even at a distance, she could see Gerald's face contort with anger. Where is she? Gerald's voice carried on the still air. Who might you be looking for? Kieran asked, his posture relaxed despite being outnumbered. My fiancée, Gerald snapped. The woman you stole during the raid. Return her now and perhaps I won't have you hanged for kidnapping. Kieran laughed, the sound carefree. Seems to me a woman can't be stolen if she leaves of her own accord. Perhaps you should ask yourself why she ran in the first place. One of Gerald's companions reached for his gun, but Gerald held up a hand to stop him. She's confused, influenced by her female hysteria. She belongs with me by law and by her father's word. She belongs to herself, Kieran replied, steel underlying his casual tone, and she's made her choice clear. Gerald's face darkened with rage. I won't be denied what's mine. Step aside, stranger, or face the consequences. I've never been good at stepping aside, Kieran said, his hand hovering near his holster. And I don't take kindly to men who think women are property. The tension crackled between them. Gwendolyn, now positioned behind Gerald's group, slipped the small revolver Kieran had given her from her pocket. She'd never fired a gun before, but the weight of it gave her courage. Last chance, Gerald warned, his hand moving toward his own weapon. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Gerald drew his gun, but Kieran was faster, firing a shot that knocked the weapon from Gerald's hand. The other 2 men reached for their guns, but Gwendolyn stepped from the trees, her revolver aimed squarely at them. Stop, she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The next shot won't be so merciful. The men froze, caught between Kieran's proven marksmanship and Gwendolyn's determined stance. Gerald clutched his injured hand, his face contorted with pain and fury. You would choose this drifter over me, he spat. Over respectability and security. I choose freedom, Gwendolyn replied. I choose a life where I'm not purchased to settle a debt, and yes, I choose him a man who sees me as a person, not a possession. The words surprised even her, but as she spoke them, Gwendolyn knew they were true. In the few days she'd known Kieran Xavier, she'd felt more respected and valued than in years under her father's roof or in Gerald's calculating gaze. This isn't over, Gerald warned, backing his horse away. Your father will disown you for this disgrace. Then I'll make my own way, Gwendolyn responded, chin lifted. As I should have done long ago. Gerald and his men retreated, casting dark glances over their shoulders as they rode back in the direction of Cottonwood Springs. Only when they were dots on the horizon did Gwendolyn lower her gun, her hands suddenly shaking with delayed fear. Kieran rode to her side, dismounting to stand before her. You were magnificent, he said, his eyes shining with admiration. Brave and true. I meant what I said, she whispered, looking up at him. About choosing you. Kieran's expression softened and he reached out to touch her cheek. I've been wandering for years, Gwendolyn, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, but these past days with you. He paused, searching for words. You make me want to stop running. Then stop, she said simply, covering his hand with hers. Stay with me. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepening with a hunger that spoke of loneliness and newfound hope. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. I don't have much to offer, he said quietly. No land, no fortune. I don't need those things, Gwendolyn replied. Just you as you are. They rode into Silver Creek together as the sun set, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street. The town was indeed growing, with new buildings under construction and people hurrying about their business despite the late hour. They found rooms at the Silver Dollar Hotel, though Kieran insisted on separate accommodations until things could be properly arranged. The proprietress, Mrs. Holloway, took an immediate liking to Gwendolyn and offered her work helping with the hotel's sewing and cleaning. Over the following weeks, Silver Creek became home. Kieran found steady work with the local livery stable, his way with horses quickly earning him respect in the community. Gwendolyn's skills with needle and thread led to additional work making dresses for the town's wealthier residents. They courted properly, with chaperoned walks and shared meals in the hotel dining room. Kieran read poetry to her in the evenings, and Gwendolyn taught him to dance in the privacy of the hotel's small parlor. They shared their histories, their dreams, their fears, building a foundation stronger than the rushed passion of their first days together. When Kieran proposed a month later, with a simple silver ring bought from the town's jeweler, Gwendolyn accepted without hesitation. They were married by the traveling circuit preacher in a small ceremony attended by their new friends from Silver Creek. There was no elaborate dress this time, no festival decorations, just a simple blue dress that Gwendolyn had sewn herself and wildflowers in her hair. As they exchanged vows beneath the cottonwood trees by the creek that gave the town its name, Gwendolyn thought of how differently her life had turned out from what she'd expected on that chaotic day in Cottonwood Springs. The wedding celebration moved to the hotel, where tables had been set up in the dining room and local musicians played cheerful tunes. As Kieran led Gwendolyn in a dance, he leaned down to whisper in her ear, "You remember what I called you that first day?" "When I found you hiding at the festival," Gwendolyn smiled, remembering. "You didn't call me anything, as I recall." Kieran spun her gently, then pulled her close again. "In my mind, I did. When I saw you in that wedding dress, dirt on your cheek and fire in your eyes, I thought, there goes my beloved, even though she doesn't know it yet." "Your beloved," Gwendolyn repeated, savoring the word. "I like that much better than fiancé or even wife." "Good," Kieran said, his eyes crinkling with his smile, "because that's what you'll always be to me, Gwendolyn Xavier. My beloved, who I found hiding at a festival and knew, somehow, was meant to be mine." As the music played and the stars appeared outside, Gwendolyn rested her head against her husband's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. From chaos had come clarity, from fear had come courage, and from a chance encounter had come a love neither of them had been looking for but both had desperately needed. In the years that followed, Silver Creek grew into a proper town, with a school and a church and eventually a railroad station. Kieran and Gwendolyn built a small house on the outskirts, with a garden that reminded Gwendolyn of her mother's and shelves filled with books they read aloud to each other on winter evenings. Their family grew to include 2 daughters and a son, all with their father's storm-gray eyes and their mother's determined spirit. Kieran eventually bought the livery stable, expanding it into a successful business that included horse breeding and training. Gwendolyn opened a small shop selling dresses and linens, her fine needlework becoming known throughout the territory. Sometimes, Gwendolyn thought about the life she might have had as Gerald Dawson's wife, a life of material comfort perhaps, but empty of the joy and partnership she found with Kieran. She never regretted her decision to hide that day, nor her impulse to trust the cowboy who found her. On their 10th anniversary, Kieran presented her with a journal bound in soft leather. Inside, he had written their story, beginning with the day they met and ending with a blank page and the words, "The best is yet to come." "So we never forget how it started," he said, as Gwendolyn traced the words with her fingers. "How my beloved bride hid at a festival, and I was lucky enough to find her." "And call me beloved," Gwendolyn added, leaning up to kiss him as the sunset painted the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. A fitting backdrop to a love story that had begun in chaos but flourished in the peace they had built together on the frontier.